This is DW News. We are streaming live from Berlin. I'm Melissa Chan.
And I'm Hannah Hummel.
We're here to give you the latest on the Iran war. We'll be speaking to correspondents from across the region, and we also have DW's Middle East analyst Shani Razanis in the studio. Welcome, Shani. And now, because this is online, we encourage you to post your comments and questions in the chat. Hannah here will be looking at what you've got to say and bringing your content into the discussion. Don't be shy. This is your chance to connect with reporters directly covering this conflict. Now, a recap of where things stand. Explosions are being reported across Iran's capital. Israel's military says it's launched a, quote, large-scale wave of strikes on regime infrastructure in Tehran. Israel also been striking Lebanon, targeting strongholds linked to Iranian-backed Hezbollah. Iran continues to fire off retaliatory strikes across the region, with air raid alerts sounding in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Now, beyond that, beyond the Middle East, that is, the U.S. torpedoed a ship in international waters off Sri Lanka yesterday in a conflict which appears to be widening by the day. Iran has accused the U.S. of committing an, quote, atrocity with this sinking. So let's start with you, Shani, and ask where things stand over the last 24 hours. We've been covering this together since this weekend when the news first broke, but what are you seeing?
Well, I see, first of all, that the Iranians are defiant. They're very strong. They're very clear in their determination to fight off and to attack in all directions. We've actually seen they've managed yesterday with Hezbollah to actually synchronize attacks on Israel, saying that command and control in Iran is not completely, in disarray, as maybe Israelis and Americans would have wished it to be. We still see, the proxies in a tight coordination with them. So that means that, Iran is signaling that it's here to stay, and it's very, very determined in its fight, in its intention to fight against all aggressions. And this is also why it keeps on also attacking the Gulf states, even though, with lower tenacity. But still, the idea is that a slow erosion of stability in the Gulf will help the the goal of putting pressure on the Americans. We're seeing now some interceptions and overnight over the Tel Aviv sky. So this is happening all the time. The Iranians still manage to get routine Israeli lives shut down. Basically, we're hearing today that Israelis feel like that they managed to learn the Iranian pattern, and they feel like they can sort of slowly let life go back to normal, allow people back in workplaces. They are already opening the skies. Some flights have landed in Tel Aviv. But it's also clear
That's really incredible. I mean, in this situation, it seems like no commercial flights should be taking off.
Well, it is happening. People are flying into Israel, and soon enough, in a couple of days, probably out of Israel. It could maybe be a good sign for the whole region. No doubt it's also an important part for the Gulf. It's part of sending a sign. I think it's also important for the Israelis if they want to have, if the idea of this being a low-intensity, longer fight or conflict, then it would be crucial for Israel to be able to sustain some sort of sense of normalcy. Otherwise, I think the backlash and the frustration among Israelis could be very big. We need to keep in mind when you look at the Israeli citizens, the whole region, of course, but in Israel in particular, definitely, life are, disrupted basically since COVID days, Soon after that, there was October 7th, and, the last 2.5 years have been very, very intense. These air sirens, just to show you how well Israel is organized, there's a very clear set of routine, a set of actions that need to be taken. Who is alarmed when? The citizens almost do it blindly, but just to show you it's how this has become a normalcy, but this is not really a normal state of being.
And Israel and the United States are continuing to strike targets across Iran. I'm curious, are they still focused on military targets and also elements, anything connected to their nuclear program, or have they pivoted strategy and changed things?
Well, they're doing all at the same. It seems like they seem to be quite content what they're saying about their success in the west of Iran, managing to tackle launchers and to slow down the Iranian possibility to have wide barrages out. We are also seeing that in comparison to what happened in the 12 Days War. There is a lower rate of Iran launching. Also, Iranians are are not focusing only on Israel right now, but they also have other fronts, which also slows. It helps Israel because Israel defense air system, they when they're oversaturated, that's when they start failing. But when the pace is low, they actually have better capability of fending off and intercepting all the attacks.
And yeah, and I understand that the pace has been lowered. Of course, that's why you have those commercial flights. Again, as a quick reminder to everybody, I'm seeing comments, but really, if you post questions, I will actually bring them in. Hannah will also bring them in.
I'm going to jump in here quickly and say that I'm having some technical issues with my laptop. And is there any chance I can grab yours to have a look at some of those questions?
It's live stream, and it just
is what it is. We're just living in the moment, everyone.
Absolutely.
But now I'm ready to go,
and
I will be
rock
checking up on all of your questions.
Okay, so I want to continue talking a little bit about the United States and Israel and their strategy. There does appear to be what I call a decapitation strategy, and that's what a lot of military analysts are also calling, which is an attempt to take out the heads of Iran's various government branches and other political leaders. And of course, anyone who's named the new supreme leader has an uncomfortable countdown clock, hanging over him. What is the thinking behind this?
Well, I think it's just maximum pressure. The Israelis and the Americans still want to see, they are not seeing what they expected, maybe more defectors from the Iranian military or from the Iranian besiege or, internal.
They're not?
No,
Okay.
not in the masses, not in numbers that they were maybe expecting. Of course, we are also not seeing opposition rising yet. But we also need to keep in mind that Iran is still constantly being bombarded. There's a lot of uncertainty, and there's also very limited access to information, real live information of what's happening in Iran at every moment. So we also need to keep that in mind. But, it's interesting, you're talking about the decapitation strategy. We've also seen Israel doing that with Hamas, taking out the leaders one by one. Hamas, after 2.5 years, is still on its feet. It's still standing, it's still operating, it's actually running its part of the Gaza Strip. So this strategy that Israel have had, he also pursued that in Lebanon with, now we have Naim Qassem as the new leader of Hezbollah. Before that, Hassan Nasrallah was taken out by Israel in a direct attack on his bunker. And, we have to understand what drives organizations like Hezbollah, what drives the regime in Iran, and the Islamic Revolution, it's an ideology. These are people that are deeply driven and they're deeply committed to their purposes and to what they're doing. So in that aspect, first of all, dying for the sake of that cause is martyrdom, is becoming a shaheed. That's nothing they're afraid of. It's actually a noble cause that they're not afraid of and not deterred from. And second, because, again, when you have a very deeply driven motivation, it's really hard to one is, it's very easy to replace one with another. And the system as a whole, especially in Iran, that the regime has fortified for the last almost 50 years, it's a very well-functioning machine. It's a very well-functioning system.
And it's fascinating then that Israel and the United States has decided to follow the playbook that you've already said doesn't work. What is the thinking behind that?
Well, when you know what they say, if you have a hammer, everything is a nail. It's something that Israelis are very good at. It's and I think also specifically now, if you're looking into the strategy when it comes to Iran from the Israeli and American side, they're maybe hoping to peel off another layer of leadership until they reach a pragmatic enough, a weakened enough, a deterred enough level of leadership that will be willing to compromise and talk.
I mean, you talk about that concentric circles of leadership, and I can't help but think about Trump when he was doing his Q&A with reporters saying that he's thinking about a Venezuela model of installing a new leader that's within the regime apparatus, and yet he admitted that perhaps the United States and Israel accidentally overbombed to the point that they killed potential candidates that they were hoping to work with. Any thoughts on that? Well,
just to show you, maybe, I think it was Eisenhower who said, plans are worthless, but planning is everything. So, as much as the Americans and Israelis were trying to sell us that this operation is very tightly, run and very well orchestrated and very well in advance planned, there is things that are happening on the ground that sometimes are out of your control. And this is all to say we are actually not sure how well planned this is because, again, we're trying to look again into the strategy, the exit strategy, or what happens next, or how weakened is the regime de facto on the ground. We're still seeing very limited success in that field. So But I also think we have not seen everything yet, and I'm sure there are also back channels we are not fully aware of and things that are happening, sort of more covert operations that are underground. For now, I think definitely when you listen to Israeli officials, they're almost somewhat surprised by both Hezbollah and Iran being so well synchronized and so well operating, still managing to disrupt life in Israel and still managing to show quite defiant stand.
I have another question, a few more questions for you, but Hannah, I want to check in. Any luck, or is it pretty quiet?
Yes, we've got one question coming through asking how are EU strategists or leaders approving, if at all, of a potential regime change in Iran? And I know that UK, Keir Starmer has been pretty public in his disapproval of what the US is doing in Iran right now, but then Germany's Merz has been in Washington for talks to see what's going on there. And do you guys have anything to weigh into that about just general opinion across the EU?
Starmer had said that he didn't want to get engaged because, of course, in the UK, there's a lot of memories, frankly, in the United States as well, lots of memories about Iraq and the unpopularity of that conflict. And so there was so much...
There's been this big thing about the destruction of the special relationship now between the UK and the US as a result of Starmer voicing his real disapproval.
We've also seen the pressure on Spain very clearly. Trump, during the press conference with Merz, who's actually been probably the most prominent European leader to sort of back this this action. He was, but then Trump used that opportunity to bash the Spaniards, the Spanish leadership for their stand on this. I think there's two levels here. There's, first of all, the concern from the erosion of international order, international law, common practice of engagement that the world has has tried so hard to establish and had managed to sustain for many decades after the horrible trauma of World War II, and the fear of the crumbling of these institutions and these standards. That's a real fear. But at the same time, Trump very wisely, very strategically, framing this whole attack, this whole war, this whole conflict as for the cause of the Iranian people, trying to free them from 50 years of brutal tyranny under the Islamic Republic regime. That's for itself make it very hard for you to outright, bluntly be against this, because there is no doubt that the Iranian regime has been very oppressive, very cruel, and Khamenei himself, against his people, but not only against himself. And as Trump has said several times, the sheet of accusations against Iran as an instigator of international terror, that's a real one, and it's hitting all over the globe. And it's also something when we talk about the effect on Europe, that's also something to keep in mind. Two possible effects on Europe as refugees escaping the region, escaping Iran, but also terror that could be hitting European cities and everywhere else in the world as part of solidarity or some sort of a retaliation of forces that are aligned with Iran and the regime.
Shani, I have a few more questions for you, but I'm going to hold it until later because we can now go to Jerusalem. Our DW correspondent there, Mariel Mueller. Thank you so much, Mariel. I want to ask you what's been happening in the region in the last 24 hours in terms of the latest strikes that we've been hearing in Israel and also in Lebanon. I understand people have been hurt. Tell us a little bit more about the damage.
So, first of all, just a few minutes ago, the IDF put out a statement saying that it's continuing its attacks on Iranian infrastructure of the Iranian regime across Tehran. It's also continuing its attacks on Lebanon, in Beirut, for example, against Hezbollah operatives there and Hezbollah command centers. The IDF also, just now in the briefing, basically the IDF spokesperson also showed footage of how the IDF shot down an Iranian fighter jet yesterday. It's something that hasn't happened in decades here, so it's a big deal for the Israeli military. He also talked about an update in the Israel's home front policy. So from 12 p.m. today, workplaces are allowed to open again if they have a shelter nearby. And also gatherings of up to 50 people will be allowed also again if there's a shelter within reach. Schools remain closed. And now to what happened overnight. So here in Israel, we've been hearing air raid sirens. The first one at 3 a.m. in the morning and another one at 6 a.m. And the alarms went off, basically waking everyone up. And later it turned out that reportedly there was parallel attacks coming from Iran and Lebanon simultaneously. There were no reports of any injuries here in Israel. In Lebanon, overnight, 8 people were killed, according to the Lebanese Health Ministry. Yesterday, the IDF has told Lebanese residents who are living south of the Litani River to move north of the river. And you have to, basically keep in mind that this is a large part of Lebanon. It's roughly 10% of Lebanon's territory. So you can imagine people scrambling, basically late in the evening to get and to move to safety, because the IDF basically said that they're intending to increase military action in this area. And hours after issuing this warning, the first strikes hit in southern Lebanon, but also in the north. There was one attack 80 kilometers north of Beirut in the city of Tripoli. A Palestinian refugee camp was hit. 2 people were killed. It's unclear who the IDF targeted there. And also there was an Israeli drone strike who killed 3 people on a coastal highway, according to Lebanese state media. Also unclear who was targeted here. And so these are the latest strikes that happened in Lebanon. In southern Beirut, there were also strikes in the Dair district again. That is the district where the IDF suspects many Hezbollah operatives to be hiding. We've also seen reports of Hezbollah operatives basically dispersing in Beirut, hiding in hotels that have been then hit by IDF. But these are all accounts that we cannot independently verify from here, of course. The Lebanese Health Ministry has said since Hezbollah joined this war 4 days ago, 70 people have been killed and around 430 have been wounded. It's unclear how many of these are actually operatives or militants from Hezbollah and how many are civilians. But the Lebanese Health Ministry says 7 of them were children, and there were reports of officials with Hezbollah and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad militant group that were killed as well.
Mariel, now I want to pivot a little bit. Shani was talking about the decline in Iranian missile strikes on Israel, despite the fact that there has been damage. And I'm curious, is this a sign that the country's air defense system is doing its job, or is this a sign that Tehran is trying to conserve its arsenal?
Well, it's both. The air defenses here are working. Yesterday, in another press briefing with the IDF, the spokesperson said that 99% of Iranian drones were intercepted since the start of this war. He wouldn't give a number for missile interceptions, but he said it's a very high rate. So air defenses here are multi-layered, very sophisticated, also supported by Americans. So, and the Israeli military also said that they have managed to destroy 300 ballistic missile launchers, which is crucial for the Israelis, because they say without these, of course, there will be less attacks. And that is what it seems that they have already managed to do. They've also said that they have reduced Iran's missile stockpiles, and that is also, according to observers, but also to the IDF, that might be a key reason why we've seen less barrages and the frequency is not as high anymore as compared to the beginning of this new escalation.
Right. I'm curious, has citizen sentiment in Israel changed over the past few days, or is there still strong support for this war?
Well, there was a poll just published yesterday by the Israel Democracy Institute, and it basically shows that there is strong support, but among Jewish Israelis especially. So 93 of them back the military action against Iran, and only 26 of Arab Israelis are in favor of this conflict. The poll also asked whether or not people trust in Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to deal and to manage this operation. And again, here among Jewish Israelis, 74% said that they trust him, and only 16% of Arab Israelis said that they have this confidence in him. So yeah, it's important to keep in mind that there's always this kind of divide or difference among these two groups. Jewish Israelis, which make up around 78% of the population, see Iran as a real threat. I mean, that has not changed. That has been like this for a long time. So they basically say we need to take this opportunity to take out not only Iran's regime, but also its proxies in the region, because they have been attacking and hurting Israelis for a long time. Also, Israelis have seen early military successes. The killing of Iran's supreme leader and also other leading figures has basically encouraged Israelis that this was the right step to start this conflict. And also the strong coordination with the Americans is also giving or adding to this confidence.
Miriam Miller, thank you very much. We'll leave it there. Very interesting to get that assessment from Jerusalem. Hannah, are you?
Yeah, definitely. We've got lots of people weighing in. Someone wants to know what's going on with the Kurdish militias, which is also very interesting.
Kurdish militias where? In Iraq or elsewhere, right?
Well, exactly. It's a bit confusing, isn't it? I mean, we know that there are pro-American Iranian Kurdish forces that are being funded by the CIA that
we don't know. It's murky.
Potentially be involved in this, that could potentially be coming in as a part of this.
That's also a possibility that it's part of the messaging campaign. So we
exactly. So Shania, what do you?
Yes. Well, we're talking about. Well, first of all, Iran has several ethnicities. You know, the big part of the population is Persian, but not exclusively. It's anything between 7 to 10%, I think, are considered to be Kurds. They're mostly in the northern part, closer to the border with Iraq, and this is where we've been also seeing a lot of reports, at least, on action in the last days, where it seems like an Israeli-led effort to try and get something steering up there there are also opposition Iranian Kurdish groups that are operating from the Iraqi side of the border. And so the idea is to utilize them. Their number and their capacities are probably very limited. It's yet to be seen if this is a feasible plan in any way, but there are several reports about this being a path being pursued, let's put it that way. Another minority we should maybe mention in Iran, a substantial one, is the Azeri. And what we've been seeing this morning is Iran launching missiles and sending drones to Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is a very key ally of Israel, actually, for many years, and for oil and energy supply, but also it's basically the getaway for covert operation of Israelis, apparently, according to assessments, into Iran because of the border, because there's no access for Israelis to any other country that is sharing a border with Iran.
Yes.
So Azerbaijan has a and again, if we're looking at what this war has done, there were many players around Iran who managed to be, to play on both courts, to be also friendly with Israel and at the same time maintain good relationship with Iran. Qatar is another example of that, Oman. And then at the same time, we're seeing now that Iran is kind of pushing everybody, you got to take a side, this cannot work anymore, you're either with us or against us.
Sorry,
go ahead, please.
But with regard to the militias, is that a way to potentially get boots on the ground for the US and Israel in Iran? A small number.
The idea is destabilize the regime, get it as busy as possible, get it, from all directions in every facet possible. This is the idea. Chaos and insecurity, instability, that's the key.
We've got a great follow-up question for that then from Jeff Bilkins, who wants to know, what would an alternative regime be?
That's the big question, Jeff. You hit the nail on the head. We are not quite sure. I think if you ask what Israelis or the Americans would want, then I think also there, I'm not sure we'll see the same answer, because we've seen, for example, Trump in Venezuela. He wants a pragmatic regime. He wouldn't mind having access to the giant oil reserves, for example, that the Iranians have. I'm sure he's willing to live with a compromise that the Israelis might not find ideal. I think the Israelis would, if we go back to the days of the Shah, before the revolution, there were very tight connections between Israel and Iran. Of course, also the Americans back then. They'd be happy to go back to the same model. But if that's too idealistic and too hard to reach, I think that even just Iran dissembling into chaos, breaking into ethnic groups, internal strifes, any of that, anything that will maintain Iran busy with itself and not with Israel will make Israel happy.
Yeah, I mean, speaking about this whole thing spiraling into a regional conflict, we are going to the Gulf now because we're joined by Emily Gordine, journalist based in Dubai, at least for now, stuck in Dubai, unfortunately. Emily, how were things in Dubai overnight for people there?
Well, the night itself was quiet. Last evening, the Emirati authorities, we understand, downed several drones that were launched from Iran. At the same time, tourists have been leaving the country, have been trying to leave the country via Oman. The Emirates and Etihad, the two main airlines here in the United Arab Emirates, have still suspended their flights. There is a considerate backlog of passengers who have been trying to get out of the country. In general, it seems Iran is firing fewer missiles at the United Arab Emirates. Instead, we're seeing an increase in drone attacks. France has now sent Rafale fighter jets to support Emirati air defenses, also because they have French troops on the ground here. They're planning on sending more fighter jets. Italy as well has promised to send air defense support to the region. In the meantime, we understand that the US submarine has downed an Iranian vessel off the coast of Sri Lanka. In return, this morning, we heard that from the Iranians that it struck a US oil tanker in the northern part of the Strait of Hormuz. So things are still developing very rapidly here. Yes.
Now, you say that strikes have slowed down a little bit, and there is, of course, deep interest in the Gulf, especially in the UAE, to restart commercial flights as soon as possible. Though Iran appears to be trying to raise the cost of war for America's regional partners by striking these Gulf states. Do you think this strategy is working?
I think for the moment, no, it's not. The Gulf states have responded to these attacks by engaging in mostly defensive operations. So the UAE, from what we understand from authorities, has managed to down over 90% of the incoming attacks. That is quite an impressive track record for a country like the United Arab Emirates. Its neighboring countries has been not quite as effective, but similar effectiveness rates. But ultimately, what we're seeing, even though we are seeing this sort of steady flow of Iranian strikes, we've not seen any backing down from the Americans or from the Israelis. So that would suggest that the Gulf states, even if this, of course, is not in their interest, this sort of conflict, this kind of escalation, have also not been able to dissuade the Americans or the Israelis from continuing their strikes on Iran.
And what can you tell us about oil and liquefied natural gas assets across the region that have been impacted, either being directly hit or production on pause as a result of all that's been happening?
Yeah, so we've seen several attempted hits, for example, in Saudi Arabia. We've also seen hits here in Al Fujairah at an oil processing facility, attacks on oil tankers. There's a variety of targets here that the Iranians have picked out. In Saudi Arabia, one of the facilities was now closed. And of course, they have effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz, which is the gateway for about 20% of the world's oil and energy sources, essentially, 20% of the world's oil exports. So as a result, we've seen oil and gas prices increase quite substantially. And of course, that's worrying a lot of people about the impact on inflation, for example. But there, I think, caution is advised in the sense that it usually takes about 3 months for oil and the increase in oil and gas prices to actually impact other commodities. So there is a bit of, I think the verdict is still out on how that will really impact inflation around the world. And also you have to keep in mind the US is now producing more oil itself. There's also an element of how Venezuela might, given the US's recent operations in Venezuela, might also be able to help out in one way or another. So even though the oil and gas production here is impacted, so far the impacts in and of itself around the world in terms of inflation are still limited, I would say, at this point.
I do want to ask a couple more questions, but since you were talking about the Strait of Hormuz now, Hannah, I know there were technical difficulties with your laptop, so I'm not sure if you have this queued up, but do you have I know you were showing me this very interesting graph in terms of the
Indeed,
ships.
I think we've lost that in the mix of everything, but it was essentially just a graph that showed the complete dip of any activity going on in the Strait of Hormuz, which, I mean, we know that it's being completely closed off, but it was quite interesting to see that total just nada. Can I maybe just jump in here, because I think it's relevant to what Emily was saying about everything that's going on in the Gulf, but someone is asking us to talk more about what the economic consequences of all this are going to be.
Well, I just want to say, when it comes to the Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz and what we're seeing with the oil, Iran has not used they don't go all the way in. I mean, there are no mines still in the Straits. This is still possible. You know, Donald Trump has mentioned yesterday that he might be willing to let American vessels to accompany sheep through the Straits of Hormuz, meaning he's willing to back them, but with no insurance. There's going to be very few of them who would not even dare to try. And considering the sinking of the ship in Sri Lanka, it's clear that the water are becoming a very dangerous front for this war. Same goes with hitting the oil reservoirs or oil fields in the Gulf, for the Saudis or anywhere else. I mean, the Iranians have been sending. We have seen them, for example, hit drones already on the third day in Aramco, in the Saudi government-run oil plantation. But at the same time, they did not go all in. I think they're trying to signal this could get worse, and I think they're being very cautious to escalate to the worst possible scenario.
It's talking about escalation. I mean, going back to Emily, then I'm curious about that, because it appears that the Houthis, which is a group in Yemen that has served as a proxy to Iran, have so far appeared to remain on the sidelines of this conflict, kind of. Is there a feeling they are being held in reserve as a deterrent against Saudi Arabia, or where you are at the UAE?
Well, I think in terms of abilities, what we're talking about is strikes on the Gulf and on potential shipping, because some of the shipping that is not being able to go through the Strait of Hormuz has been diverted to that area, so to speak, to the other side, and so there is to the Red Sea. So there is some concern that they could be getting involved there as well. That being said, the Gulf states are, at least some of them, are requesting more support for their air defenses from the Europeans, from international partners. So they are preparing. And at this point, that would essentially, we're talking about rising escalations. So far, what the Iranians have done, the Gulf states have been fairly prepared for in terms of military and economic resilience. Now, it's a question of, how far do you want to escalate this with the Gulf states? Because this is, the Gulf states are not at the end of their abilities, So if you say the Houthis might get involved, that could then prompt the Gulf states to think about, well, that requires a more active involvement of us in Iran as well. That could push them to form some kind of coalition, for example, that would then support strikes in some form on Iran, or they would allow, for example, the Americans to start using their military bases in the various Gulf countries to start striking Iran as well, which is something that, in theory, they haven't been allowing the Americans in some states at all. And I mean, in the UAE, for example, this is not, the government has not moved from that stance. So there are options that the Gulf states can take. Not all options have been taken just yet. And but again, that would be seen certainly as an escalation.
Very interesting. Now, I want to pivot a little bit. I want both, Emily, your thoughts on this, but also Shani. So I'll go to Shani first, and then also we'll check in on questions and comments next. But are we going to, long term, with the Gulf states facing a very difficult situation, they have to make their decisions. I want to think about the U.S. and Israel. Are we seeing a potential divergence in terms of what the U.S. wants versus what Israel wants? Could that end up being a problem if this conflict continues on for weeks or even months?
Well, definitely, we know we're talking about the Gulf, we're talking about several different, this is not a monolith. Each one has its own criteria, priorities. Each one has its own different religious and ethnic makeshift. Yeah, so that, and their relations with the U.S. or Israel are very different. You have for example, UAE much closer to Israel. Qatar, for example, has had a very, strained relations with Israel. Saudi Arabia has no official connection to Israel. So there's, of course, a different, a different set of priorities. It seems like what I've been noticing after the first 2 days that the Americans were trying to signal publicly their alliance also with the Gulf countries to sort of show that they also have their backs and they're working together and they're there for them. And we've seen more also of the Europeans. And I can also think about, when you see the Italians and the Spanish, sending their backup to the Gulf in ways that the Ukrainians would have probably dreamt of receiving 4 years ago already. And the key is that they just don't have oil. For Europeans, for the Americans, the oil and the insurance of the supply of oil is very, very important. Israel, only one we are hearing, has some back channels to some of the countries trying to prompt them up because they understand they are the weak link. If they break and if their lobby goes is too tight, with Trump to call this off, this will jeopardize Israel's wish to keep on with the war.
Great. Hannah, anything? And then I think I want to let Emily get going.
Not on that specific one.
Okay.
I do have a kind of interesting step to the side question.
Okay, let's hold that and first
Sure.
thank Emily for your time. And we will hopefully speak to you in another live stream over the coming days. Stay safe there. All right, Hannah.
Okay, I'm going to jump in with this one before we go over to Nimisha. But I have someone asking, if this conflict prolongs, will Russia, China or North Korea attempt to rebuild the old regime in return for access to Iran's oil share?
It's hard for me to see Russia do anything. We've seen another statement by the Russians showing how they're this morning, how frustrated they are with things and how, they find it. I think those who have wanted to jump immediately had all the reasons and all the excuses to do it right as at the start of this. I think everybody's trying to kind of see how this is winding down. I don't see that. Never say never, but it seems like unless there's an unexpected development, a direct attack, or that might make them feel like they're in direct jeopardy. Of course, the ripple effect affects them as well, and we will talk about it maybe later today, further on Deutsche Welle's broadcasting. But the immediate response, I think, would stay limited.
And just to weigh in on China, I would say that China is sitting this one out. They might do something a little bit more passive in the same way that they have been involved with the Russia-Ukraine war in terms of long-term supplying economic support and the materials to create missile assets or military assets and stuff like that. But frankly, in many ways, of course, it's going to be hit in terms of energy prices, but they're continuing to produce AI chips and selling EV vehicles and sitting this one out. And frankly, you can interpret that as a win for them. A weakening United States, depleting its resources. Yep. So that is a very fantastic point there. Yes, we do want to now turn to Nimisha Jaiswal, DW correspondent, who is currently in Delhi with us because we want to talk about this. Nimisha, welcome. We want to talk about this U.S. submarine that sank an Iranian warship off the southern coast of Sri Lanka. The name of the warship was Iris Dana, and the ship had been taking part in a naval exercise. So to our knowledge, this ship was not a part of active military operations in the current conflict. Yes, you're seeing video now supplied by the U.S. government targeting this ship. We'll let it run for a little bit longer, and then after that, I want to send you to listen to a soundbite from the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, his comments on what actually happened there. Let's have a listen. Hopefully we're pulling up that soundbite of the Defense Secretary. Stand by, it's almost coming.
Yesterday, in the Indian Ocean, and we'll play it on the screen there, an American submarine sunk an Iranian warship that thought it was safe in international waters. Instead, it was sunk by a torpedo. Quiet death. The first sinking of an enemy ship by a torpedo since World War II. Like in that war, back when we were still the War Department, we are fighting to win.
Now, there have been reports that Sri Lankan authorities have been picking up bodies floating in the seas. Nimisha, what can you tell us about the number killed so far, and have there been any survivors?
Well, Melissa, what we know so far is from the Sri Lankan authorities. They received a call, a crisis call, for a distress call from the Warship at about 5 a.m. local time. They reacted to that call because even though the ship sank about 40 kilometers south of Sri Lanka, which is not Sri Lankan territorial waters anymore, but they do have an obligation as part of an international convention to carry out search and rescue, and that it did fall within that region at least. And within an hour, Sri Lankan rescue forces were there, but they reported that all they saw was some oil patches and some rafts. So the ship completely disappeared. They did not see any attacking ship or submarine either. Now, it is reported that over 80 people have been killed and around 30 people were rescued from this ship. And these people were taken to the southwestern port city of Gull, where they are being treated in a hospital.
And what do we know about what actually happened? Was this an unprovoked attack?
Well, the details provided by both sides are still a bit few and far between, but we can build together a fact sheet of sorts. And then there is, of course, a lot of theories going around, as does tend to happen in these instances. Now, we know that the Iranian warship Iristena was on the Indian coast as part of some naval exercises that India was hosting. This is the Milan 2026. It's a biennial naval exercise where over 70 countries participated, as well as the International Fleet Review, also hosted by India. And it was on its way home. It seems it was in international waters when it was hit. We do have U.S. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth's comments that we just heard, where he said that it was given a quiet death. He did not name the ship, but it's pretty easy to put two and two together, and it does look like that this was the ship that he was referring to. We also have a comment on X by the Iranian foreign minister
Nimisha, just really quickly,
the U.S. will regret this action, that it was unprovoked.
No, continue your thought, but I just want to let everyone know the pictures that you're seeing or were just playing just now were of Sri Lankan rescue workers pulling in bodies from the ocean. Nimisha, very sorry, but I wanted to sort of explain what people were seeing there. Please continue. And now we're seeing them again.
Of
All right.
course.
Yes, go ahead. Please continue.
Yeah, I was just saying that the Iranian foreign minister did acknowledge that the ship was hit. He said that the U.S. will come to regret this unprovoked action, and he did mention that the ship was a guest of the Indian Navy. So these are the details that we have coming out. Now, of course, the theories that are coming out is that this was a stealth attack. The ship did not even realize that the submarine was in its surroundings. Others said that its defenses were disabled by this U.S. submarine. Now, we don't have any of these details confirmed yet. And while this was an unprovoked attack, the U.S. and President Trump have repeatedly said that they want to decimate the Iranian Navy, and it seems like this frigate was considered a fair target.
And just pulling up what Nimisha was talking about there, we do have the tweet here from the Iranian foreign minister. And there we can see, hopefully we'll get that up on screen for you all, that Abbas Araghchi is really saying that this ship was struck in international waters without warning. Mark my words, the US will come to bitterly regret the precedent that it has set. And there, in that image that he's posted, you can see the sailors
from the military exercise.
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly, from this military exercise. And actually, I will just take this opportunity, since Nimisha was speaking about those exercises there, that we do have more images of these sailors at those military exercises. We have video of them, and this is them here. I'll make that full screen. Before they entered back onto that ship, and the Sri Lankan deputy foreign minister said that this ship was actually heading back to Iran after it attended those naval exercises in India in February. So, yeah, quite
incredible
stark image there to see them. Exactly.
For sure. Now, Namisha, this happened very far away, an entirely different theater from the Middle East. How much of a surprise has this been for Sri Lanka and India, the hosts of this military exercise?
Well, it's definitely a surprise, Melissa. There has been a sense in South Asia that we are too far from this theatre of war to truly be involved. And this is the first such attack outside the region. So far, South Asia has been most concerned about the massive numbers of immigrants that head to the Gulf, especially from India. And there has been reach outs on that subject. There have been helplines established to help people come back home. But this attack actually happening in international waters, but close to India, and especially on India, there seems to be a fair amount of pressure. This is seen as the backyard of India. It is seen as a strategic waters for India, even though, once again, it's not territorially Indian waters. There's also theories from analysts here saying that the ship was not attacked sooner while it was still in Indian waters to avoid any kind of a conflict with India. But it's interesting, there's a lot of pressure on India to put out a statement from the opposition especially, but no word has so far emerged from the Ministry of External Affairs in Delhi or from any other authorities. The only interesting thing that we could find was that in the last day was that there is an Ministry of External Affairs fact check handle on X, and they put out a post saying that this was false information coming out on an American channel where an expert alleged that Indian ports were being used by the US to launch attacks on Iran, and India said that this is blatantly false and should not be believed. So this is the only reference that Indian authorities have made so far to anything connected to action around this war in this region.
Yeah, I can imagine that India was hosting this military exercise and one of their guests got torpedoed. I imagine this is a massive crisis for the Modi government.
Well, from the looks of how the Modi government is reacting, they would deny that. The statements that have been put out unofficially is that, look, it was a guest of the Indian Navy, but it had left and it was in international waters, and that it is not really India's place at this point to weigh in on that. But there's massive pressure coming in from the opposition. There is the leaders of the opposition, Rahul Gandhi, saying this is happening in India's own backyard and still no comment. There's criticism coming in from Kashmiri politicians saying Iran has always stood by India's side. So why is India not stepping up at this point of time? So in that sense, there is a lot of pressure, and there is a balancing act for the Modi government to carry out too, because on the one hand, it is the Modi government and India is part of the Quad agreement, which includes the US, and it also has a logistics agreement with the US that dates back to 2016, which allows for both parties to use each other's military facilities for repairs, refueling, as well as supplies. But Indian analysts as well as others are also encouraging India to remain independent when it comes to this crisis. And India has been very firm in reiterating that it cannot be told by anybody else what to do. We saw that in the Russia-Ukraine war. So there is this pressure, but they do want to steer clear of it.
I just want to tell people that the images that you're seeing right now are from Sri Lanka. Earlier, it was the hospital in which survivors had been taken to. Shani, I think you have something that you wanted to add to all this? Or?
Well, interestingly enough, it's almost, we find Pakistan here in a different position versus what you would expect the Indians to be, because the Pakistanis were actually sending yesterday messages to Saudi Arabia, supporting Saudi Arabia, sending these messages to Iran, because there is a Saudi Arabia-Pakistani pact of defense where they're basically supposed to back each other up, and Pakistan's nuclear umbrella is actually extended theoretically to the Saudis.
That was signed, or that agreement was fairly recent? Or?
Correct.
Yes.
That's something happened in 2025. So in a reversal of roles here, we see the Pakistanis in a way by proxy standing with the U.S. coalition, and where the Indians are a bit more reluctant in taking a position here.
And yeah, just to follow, and last question for you then, Namisha. I mean, given what Shani was just saying, I want you to, if you can, talk a little bit more about the implications given this submarine and warship incident reaching this far. How is this going to impact Greater Asia in terms of geopolitics there?
Well, especially when it comes to India, Melissa, there is a lot of pressure, like I mentioned, to react. But there's also a relationship, a balancing act being carried out there. I mentioned the correlation with the US already, but India does have strong ties with Iran as well as with Israel. Prime Minister Modi was in Israel days before this conflict took off. And we do know that India has invested heavily in the Chabahar port in Iran. There was a promise of $500 million worth of investment back in 2016. This was reiterated in 2024. But interestingly, in the budget of this year from India, there was zero allocation for this port. And that really stood out to analysts here, saying that India seems to be backing off from that relationship with Iran, even though it promises to be more neutral in this setting. So that silence and the fact that India is just saying, let's please de-escalate, but it has not said anything in support of Iran or in support of Iran's sovereignty is interesting. So even though India is not saying something clearly, it does seem to be taking a side. But the fact that there is now conflict in what is considered India's backwaters may force the Indian government to actually come out with some kind of a comment which may then reflect their position.
Nimisha Jaiswal, I want to let you get going, but let's do a final check to see if there are any comments or questions for you before we move on. Hannah, how's the chat been like?
The chat's been good. We've got some great questions coming through, some really insightful ones, really from people, I guess, from all over the world wanting to hear the different perspectives. And with that in mind, we do have one person asking, what are the potential chances for this to be like another situation similar to Iraq or Afghanistan, where there are, well-known failures in the past, and is something like that likely to happen again?
Yeah, well, let's just hold on. Is there anything for Nimisha there?
For Nimisha, no, I'm afraid not. We don't have any more questions regarding the Sri Lankan
Nimisha,
ships.
unless you have any final thoughts, I'll let you get going.
It sounds good.
Okay, all right, Nimisha Jaiswal in Delhi, thank you very much. All right, if you can...
Indeed,
yes.
sorry, I didn't mean to jump ship
No worries,
there,
that question.
because it's
Very
definitely a bit of
careful with ship these days.
a bit of a sidestep there. But with regards to things that have gone on in the past, especially in Iraq and Afghanistan, is that something where we can see the past potentially repeating itself here?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the potential for a mess is ginormous. This is the fear. If you look at the American audience and the very little support that there is there for, and very little appetite for this war that was launched on Saturday, it's very much connected to the trauma, how seared this experience of the prolonged, endless and actually futile wars that were conducted there. Hegseth, in his speech earlier this week, was directly facing those concerns by the Americans. He said clearly, this is not an endless war. This is a limited operation with clear, with clear goals in mind. And we need to also be very careful when we talk about what the goals are, because no one in the administration, the American administration, even if we look at their tweets, and they don't.
It's not very clear.
They don't. No, but one thing they don't say for sure is that they want a regime change as a goal. They're very careful with setting that as an official goal of the war. They hope this will be part of the aftermath, sort of ripple effects that will be coming, or sort of like in this like the domino effect. They want to be the ones dropping the first stone, and they want the rest to happen. But they're being very careful of that, because if this would be an official goal, it's clear to them that this would mean an endless, probably, war, because any attempt at regime change, democracy building, all of these words that we've been hearing from Afghanistan, from Iraq, that also seem to be very weak in feasibility. Let's put it that way, mildly.
You were saying earlier, Shani, about the playbook and how it seems as if Israel and the United States are using playbooks that have been used in the past that haven't actually gotten the results that they had wanted. And there's a big question why. I can't help but think about the fact that Hegseth emphasized that they are going to gain they do have air supremacy. And again, as an American, well, that was exactly what the Americans had in the Vietnam War. Plenty of air supremacy, dropped countless numbers of bombs there, didn't change the fact that no matter how many people they killed, there was always going to be an opposition leader of some kind. And we, of course, know the end result of that conflict.
Well, I think what they're counting on here in Iran is the vast unpopularity of the regime. Even the exaggerated, assessments talk about not more than 15-20% support for the regime, for the government, for the Islamic Republic as it is now in state. The problem is, it's always been the problem in Iran. It still is the problem in Iran, that the opposition is scattered. It's not organized well enough. It's not, and this is the problem. As long as there's not a strong enough, clear opposition that could threaten this very well entrenched, very well, fortified machine of a regime, it's going to be very hard to topple it.
Shani, I'm going to give you the last say on this because we were in the hot seat on day one of breaking news, and I want you to reflect on the past week and things that you're keeping an eye on and things you will be worried about. But while you're thinking about the final thought, I do want to take a moment to bring everyone up to date on some of the latest developments with our recap in this U.S.-Israel war on Iran. Israel's strikes on Iran continue with renewed attacks on Tehran this morning. Explosions have been reported across the city. Israel's military is also striking Lebanon, and what it says are targets are linked to Iranian-backed Hezbollah, and Iran's launched fresh strikes on Israel with air raid sirens sounding in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem as air defenses move to intercept the missile attacks. Iran says it's also targeting U.S. bases across the region, and Iran's foreign minister has called the U.S. sinking of an Iranian warship a, quote, atrocity, and says it will come to bitterly regret it. Iran, and that the U.S. submarine having torpedoed the ship while it was in international waters off Sri Lanka. And then finally, we have the U.S. Senate saying it has voted down a resolution which aimed to stop the war on Iran. Senators backed President Donald Trump's ability to order further military action, which means, well, gosh, that means this could go on for quite some time. Now, we just got about a minute, even less. Shani, final thoughts, and then we'll wrap.
We just need to keep our eyes on the people. We actually don't know very much of what's happening inside Iran, the civilian casualty, the internet blackout. I mean, I'm very much concerned of what happens inside Iran, not just for the sake of what happens to the regime, but the people, the civilians, they're all pawns in this big game, and we need to keep in mind, we talk strategy, we talk, power shifting. Eventually, on the ground, there's many, many people suffering in Lebanon, in Iran, in Israel, everywhere you look.
Shani Razanas, Hannah Hummel, thank you very much. And I'm Melissa Chan. Thanks for joining our live stream here. And of course, we'll have more live streams on our YouTube channel. Just keep an eye out for it. And of course, follow our social media at DW News. Thank you very much for joining us.